Absolutely. Yeah. What is good for? Absolutely. Say again, y'all. What is good for? Absolutely. Listen to me.
I'm Tavis Smiley. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number 1-800-920-1580. 1-800-920-1580. So glad to have you with us today and in this hour. Ahead of Veterans Day this Friday, civil rights expert and Dartmouth history professor Matthew Delmont joins us to unpack his new book, Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. Professor Delmont's text is filled with compelling narratives that outline, I think, with nuance and rigor and complexity, how black folk fought for this country abroad while simultaneously fighting for their rights here at home. I am pleased to welcome African American historian Matthew Delmont to this program. Professor Delmont, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on. Just in case you want to have a chance to sound off, we're talking, of course, all day around here about what happened yesterday in these national and local elections, particularly how it impacts African Americans. Any thoughts you want to share about the way you read yesterday?
I think like a lot of people, I'm surprised by the results, and pleasantly so, that they're quite different than what a lot of the polling looked like going into it. Mm-hmm. I think the key takeaway messages are it's important to vote and it's important to fight for democracy. I think the results weren't entirely positive, but I think the kind of threats that we saw from so many candidates who said they would refuse to even accept the results if they lost. I think it's important to elect people who will do everything they can to support black communities and black voters. But then to disrespect the democratic process as well. And so I think that was important throughout.
Yeah. There are a lot of folk who said that democracy was, in fact, on the ballot yesterday, if, in fact, it was.
Comes to this election that could have been much more negative. I think the truth is, when you look at black history, democracy's always been on the ballot for black Americans. So we've always been fighting for both the right to vote and then to actually have politicians, once they get elected, to actually do something to actually serve the interests of black people.
Yeah. So many of them came up short yesterday, but speaking of black history, and because you are a historian, how did you read the fact that there were so many African Americans on the ballot for top-tier positions like Stacey Abrams in Georgia and Sherry Beasley in North Carolina, Mandela Barnes in Minnesota, of course, Wes Moore pulls it off in Maryland. But how did you read in this particular moment where America is, in fact, so divided, where racism is still one of the most intractable issues in the nation after the murder of George Floyd? You get the point here. How did you read that there were, in fact, so many significant African Americans on the ballot in key states last night?
I think it's crucially important that you have viable black candidates in almost every race across the country. Hopefully, that's where we are today, and hopefully that's where we are in the future. That you need not just people in the Senate and Congress, but you need people at all levels of state and local government, because that's really where the sausage gets made. Right? That's where policy decisions are made. And if we're going to see any actual changes come into play politically, we need black candidates elected through all those offices.
Sure. So your book is called Half American: The Epic Story of African Americans Fighting World War II at Home and Abroad. I wanted to get to this book today in advance of Veterans Day this Friday. Let me just ask a couple of broad questions, and we'll narrow our way into your text. When you think about Veterans Day, you think about black veterans in particular, what do you think?
When I think about black veterans, I think about the important role black Americans and black veterans have played in every single military conflict the United States has ever been a part of, going all the way back to the American Revolution. I think for this book about World War II, more than 1 million black Americans served in the military during World War II. And of course, the military was segregated throughout the entire. They both fought to win the war militarily, but then they came home, and that whole generation immediately transitioned into fighting for civil rights. I think those are powerful stories about what it means to be an American and what it means to actually fight to make America a better country and to make actual freedom and democracy something that would be true here in the United States. I think those are the kind of stories that I hope we tell on Veterans Day. I think at a national level, it's too easy to talk about veterans and ignore the significant contributions of black veterans. But it's also easy to not pay attention to how black veterans haven't gotten their due historically and how they've been mistreated and have been discriminated against. And so I hope this history of World War II helps to bring more of those stories back to the foreground.
Yep. As I said at the top, your book is chock full of these kinds of stories. We have an hour to unpack this, so feel free to stretch out a little bit here as we continue this conversation. But when you talk about Black veterans and the ways in which their contributions have been overlooked, unpack a bit of that for me.
Yeah. So I think it's important when we think about the contributions of Black veterans that, again, they've been a part of every military conflict the U.S. has ever been a part of. If you look at World War I, for example, more than 300,000 Black veterans participated in World War I. And the story there is that Black veterans fight in the war thinking that was going to be what helped to move them closer to full citizenship. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when they come home in 1918, 1919, the exact opposite is true, that you see a wave of racial violence all across the country in the so-called Red Summer of 1919. Between World War I and World War II, you see a number of Black Americans pushed out of the military. And then during World War II, Black veterans played a really crucial role in the kind of behind-the-scenes work that it took for American allies to win the war. After the war, they're largely denied GI Bill benefits, and then they fight for civil rights and actually are successful in getting the military to desegregate in 1948. Fast forward to the next major conflict in Vietnam. At that point, Black Americans over-participate in the war. They are serving at a higher percentage and dying at a higher percentage than they are a percentage of the population. And I think that's kind of a through line throughout American history is that Black Americans have always been there to fight America's battles, but when they get home, they're not accorded the same kind of veterans are. And I think Veterans Day on the calendar gives us a time each year, both as for Black communities, but also hopefully in even broader conversations with the entire country, to surface those stories and to talk about the really significant contributions Black people have always made to the military, but how that status as veterans hasn't protected them from racism. I think that's something that not enough white Americans understand, that the Black veterans have often been disrespected when they came back to the United States, and it was deeply hurtful to them.
When you say that Black veterans played a critical role behind the scenes in World War II, tell me more about that.
Yeah. So one of the key arguments I tried to make in the book is that Black veterans or Black Americans during World War II were largely blocked from combat roles. That of course you had the Tuskegee Airmen, the groundbreaking fighter pilots. Later in the war, you have infantry troops and a couple Marine units who are Black. But by and large, the vast majority of those million Black Americans who serve in the war, they're in supply and logistical roles. So they're loading, unloading trucks, they're driving those trucks, they're clearing jungles, building runways, doing port work. But it's really vital behind-the-scenes work that helps the Allies fight and win this global war. Without the Black troops playing this kind of infrastructure work, doing all these logistics, it wouldn't have been possible for the Allies to move supplies throughout the Pacific and theater. But when you actually kind of take a step back, World War II wasn't just a battle of strategy and will. It was really a battle of supply. And if you don't have those Black American troops there, it wouldn't have been possible for Allied troops to move, shoot, or eat. And so one of the arguments I make in the book is that American allies couldn't have actually won World War II without Black servicemen and women. That's not usually the way World War II is talked about. It's not what shows up in films like Saving Private Ryan. But when you take a broader perspective of the war, it really was impossible for American allies to fight if they couldn't move all this ammunition and gasoline and food and other supplies. And it was largely Black Americans who did all that work.
Yep. The point you're making now leads me to where I want to go when we come forward here in just a second on KBLA Talk 1580, and that is this. Help me understand, when we come forward, the mindset of African Americans who would choose to serve in the armed forces in a nation that they are fighting to defend that maltreats them at home. I mean, I need to understand the mindset of why, and your point's very clear. In every war this country has fought, African Americans have served. Help me understand, again, in a moment, why it is, how it is that one would choose to serve in a military, choose to serve to fight and defend a country that maltreats them day in and day out here at home. I don't quite get that, but that's what this book is all about. It's called Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. The author of that book is Dartmouth professor Matthew Delmont. More with him when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
Our Weekly Los Angeles is the largest audited black newspaper in the state of California. Distribution of over 50,000 copies weekly. Pick up a copy every Thursday to get the latest news on African American communities of LA. You can also keep up with what's going on in Los Angeles surrounding cities by going to www.ourweekly.com. The Our Weekly website is updated daily with the current news about us and for us. For your advertising needs, Our Weekly offers economical advertising packages to fit your budget. Feel free to call Our Weekly Los Angeles at 323-905-1300 or visit the website at www.ourweekly.com. Our Weekly Los Angeles, reporting news that matters to you.
Health is Wealth and Medicare and Covered California's open enrollment for medical insurance is here. RHJ Insurance Agency can help you find affordable rates and the plan that's just right for you and your family. Call 562-204-6120 for your free quote. Don't leave your health to chance. Open enrollment is here and affordable coverage is just a phone call away. Call 562-204-6120 for your free quote and get the coverage you need. Go to www.rhjins.com.
KC Gillette is the modern man's answer to their facial hair. Complete your beard and grooming toolkit with the personal care products perfect for your beard style. Their beard and face wash gently cleanses to leave your skin and hair feeling soft and smooth. It's also infused with coconut water, argan oil, and avocado oil, topped off with the King C. Gillette signature scent. Master your style with King C. Gillette.
Where can you get holiday ready and hosting the entire family ready? Lowe's, actually. Save on appliances like the 4-piece Samsung stainless steel kitchen suite. Was $5,146, now $3,016, for a total savings of $2,130. Save all season, backed by the Lowe's Price Promise. Check back daily for deals during Black Friday month. And start saving now at Lowe's. Home to any possibility. Offer valid through 11/9. Terms and exclusions apply. See store for details. Learn more at lowes.com/price promise.
This Sunday and every Sunday is the African Marketplace and Drum Circle Community Market. Get free groceries, essential resources, and buy black from local merchants of arts, beauty, custom black merchandise, and more. Choose from a wide variety of cuisines, custom-made clothing, jewelry, and a lot more. Experience the true essence of Africatown at Leimert Park every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Join the Drum Circle, dance, enjoy live performances, connect with other conscious black people. Experience black excellence every Sunday and find us on Degnan Boulevard near Vernon and Crenshaw in the heart of Africatown at Leimert Park. That's the African Marketplace and Drum Circle Community Market. Join us for music, shopping, food, and fun this and every Sunday. Support black businesses, recycle black dollars, and feed your soul. The African Marketplace and Drum Circle Community Market every Sunday in Africatown at Leimert Park. Brought to you by Africatown Enterprise and the African Village Vendors Association.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Our guest in this hour is Matthew Delmont, civil rights expert and Dartmouth history professor. His book is called Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. Having this conversation, obviously, this week in advance of Veterans Day, which is this Friday. Professor Delmont, I was saying before that break a moment ago that I wanted to ask you, as I will now, to help me understand the mindset of African Americans. You can go all the way back to the Civil War, obviously, but the mindset of black folk. We've all seen the movie Glory and other movies that feature African Americans in the cast about the various wars this country has fought in. I want to ask you a separate and distinct question about that in a moment. But the first question is to understand better the mindset of African American men who would sign up to serve, to fight, and defend a country that so viciously maltreats them in real time at home.
It's a great question. And the title of the book, Half American, is actually drawn from a letter that a guy named James Thompson wrote. James Thompson was a 26-year-old from Wichita, Kansas, and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, he writes a letter to the Pittsburgh Courier, which is the large, influential black newspaper. He knows he's about to get drafted. He knows that he and other black Americans are about to get drafted. And so the letter he writes to the Pittsburgh Courier asks, should I sacrifice my life to live half American? Is the America I know worth defending? And those words just stuck with me for the 7 years I worked on this book, and that's why I chose Half American as the title, because I think what Thompson was wrestling with is exactly what you're asking. What does it mean to serve a country that you know doesn't treat you equally, that you know treats you as a second-class citizen, that you see news of lynching, you know about discrimination in the workplace and in schools, you can't buy a house in most parts of Wichita or most parts of the country. Black Americans answer that question in hundreds of different ways. I think that for the folks who end up serving in the military and the civil rights activists who push to get more Black Americans to participate in the war effort during World War II, the things that they see as positives about military service are some pragmatic things, that they know that military service brings payment, that you get paid for your service in the Army, Navy, Marine Corps. Those are good material benefits that would come to Black communities. There's also training that goes along with military service, and so they understood that if you sort of complete your service, by the time you get out, you're going to have skills that you might be able to use in civilian life as an electrician or a carpenter or other industry work. There's also a kind of belonging, and so one of the things that was true in earlier wars and is true in World War II is that there's this belief that if Black Americans sort of demonstrate their patriotism and demonstrate their bravery on the battlefield, that will help open up the doors to civil rights after the war. And we know that ends up not being true in the way that a lot of activists hope it's true. But particularly once the draft starts, Black Americans are faced with a really kind of clear choice. Either you accept that draft notice and you go to serve in World War II, or you risk going to jail. And there were Black Americans who chose to go to jail rather than serve in the military. I think the most famous is probably Bayard Rustin, the famous activist who helps to orchestrate the March on Washington in 1963. He spends 3 years in a federal penitentiary because he's a pacifist. And so rather than being drafted into the Army, he chooses to go to jail because of his beliefs. He doesn't think that America is a country worth fighting for, and were thousands of other Black Americans who felt the same thing. And so it is a really profound choice that Black Americans are making about what does it mean to fight for a country that truly treats you as half American.
You said a few things here now. This is getting rich and getting good, so I'm glad we're progressing here, because there's a lot more that I want to ask you about. Again, given what you've just said now, let me start with this. The name Bayard Rustin is a name that we all ought to know better. We often call that name on this program and beyond, and certainly in my work in witness, I always want to draw attention to Bayard Rustin. But tell me a bit more. You're teasing me now with this story about Bayard's decision. Again, we know him, for those of us who do know him, they most likely know him as the man who was really behind the organizing of the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave the famous I Have a Dream speech. But tell me more about Bayard's decision and how that decision, spending 3 years behind bars, factors into his activism, his work, his witness, who he becomes, the Bayard Rustin that we've come to know, essentially.
Yeah, Bayard Rustin, as you know, is such a fascinating historical figure.
Yes.
During World War II, he's still a young man, and he really cuts his teeth as an organizer, working alongside A. Philip Randolph, the famous labor union leader, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. During the war, Randolph proposes this massive March on Washington, which he threatens President Roosevelt. He says, if you don't desegregate the military, if you don't end discrimination in these war industry jobs, I'm going to lead 100,000 Black people in this massive March on Washington, D.C. President Roosevelt is scared to death that Randolph is going to make good on this promise, and eventually passes an executive order that leads to anti-discrimination provisions in the defense industries. But Bayard Rustin's working alongside Randolph, partly that effort, partly that work, and organizing with labor leaders and activists all over the country. That's what ends up providing the foundation for the March on Washington in 1963, some of that early planning work Bayard Rustin does. When he gets that draft notice, Bayard Rustin is a Quaker. He's a pacifist, and although he doesn't come out until later, he's gay. His pacifism and his Quaker religious beliefs lead him to question the validity of any war, but particularly for America to fight in this war, because he recognizes that America is a Jim Crow segregated country, that its racial policies are not dissimilar to what's going on in Nazi Germany at the time. And he also questions what's going on with America's so-called allies, with France and Great Britain, that they have colonial possessions all over the world, including in Africa and other countries that are populated by people of color. And so Bayard Rustin doesn't think World War II is. And so, because he's not willing to accept his draft status, he's sent to a federal penitentiary in Kansas for 3 years during the war. And then once he gets there, he attempts to desegregate it because he's not comfortable with the segregation that exists in this jail where he's been sent. So he's raising hell behind bars trying to desegregate the cafeteria and the other facilities there. And I think it's such a profound story because he was so true to his beliefs that he was literally willing to go to jail rather than fight in this war he didn't believe in.
It gives us another way to seeing Bayard Rustin. That's why I wanted you to share that story, which I knew a bit about, of course, and having gone through your text, know more about and learn more about. But it gives us a different way to see Bayard Rustin, his courage, his conviction, his commitment, his character. Because when we think about, and I thought you were going to go this direction and you didn't, so you surprised me. When you said the most famous person, and of course we're talking about World War II, but the most famous person I think in the country to say I'm not going to serve is Muhammad Ali. Everybody knows the Muhammad Ali story, but that was, of course, was about Vietnam, not about World War II. But Ali doesn't end up going to jail. They end up stripping him of his title. We all know the story behind that. We just had a show, a conversation on this show weeks ago about Ali's comeback, documentary out about the Ali comeback after he won that case in the Supreme Court and gets to fight again and goes on to win the championship a few more times. And that's why we call Ali the GOAT, not just because of what he did in the ring, but because of his courage and conviction outside of the ring to say, I will not fight in this Vietnam War. But Ali never spends a day in jail behind that. Rustin goes to prison for 3 years, Matthew Delmont.
Absolutely. I entirely agree that overall, if we look at all the conflicts, Ali is absolutely the most important draft resistor that there was. But I think Rustin's courage spoke volumes, and there were thousands of other black men who were in similar situations. There were students at Howard University and Morehouse University that would make their draft status, and they become local heroes among their peers, even while their peers are accepting their draft status and getting sent off to serve in the Army or in the Navy. And so that question about what does it mean to fight for a country that doesn't treat you equally, that openly, it was a profound and very real question that was facing Black Americans throughout the war.
Yeah. Let me put a finer point on that question, because the question that you posed a moment ago, which is the question, is America worth defending? I could do a week of shows, not just 3 hours as I do every day. I could do a week of shows. I could do a seminar series on this program on that one question: is America worth defending? And what a great question to be wrestling with the day after the elections in this country. Is America worth defending? That's a question that we could put to black people every day. But to put a finer point on it, it's not just a question of whether or not America is a nation worth defending, but in this context, is America a nation worth defending and dying for? Because you're putting your life on the line when you sign up to serve in World War II. Again, tell me more about how these brothers process this notion of not just defending America, but indeed putting their life on the line for America.
Yeah, I think the way I might phrase it is, for that generation of black veterans, both men and women, it was about making America a country that was worth fighting for, about changing what the country was and what the country could be. Thompson's letter, which, as you know, Thompson's letter leads the Pittsburgh Courier to launch the Double Victory campaign, which becomes the rallying cry for black Americans during the war, that they're fighting not only against fascism abroad, but they're fighting against racism at home. And I think both parts of that is important. I think particularly thinking about the fascism piece today, black Americans were among the first to recognize what a serious threat Hitler and the Nazis posed. If you looked at a black newspaper like the Chicago Defender from the 1930s, 33, 34, 35, you would have seen dozens of articles and editorials about what was going on. Understand that what's happening to Jewish people in Germany and other parts of Europe is very similar to what's happening to black Americans, particularly in the Jim Crow South, that Hitler is explicitly drawing on American racial policies to justify his racial ideas and his treatment of Jews in Europe. And so black Americans are really among the first to recognize what a serious threat fascism poses, that it's not just bad for Europe, but that it really is just two sides of the same coin. What's going on in Nazi Germany is very similar to what they call fascism in the U.S. South. And so part of why they choose to fight for America is because they see Nazi Germany as a country that has to be defeated. And so despite all of their concerns and deeply rooted questioning of America, they still understand that Nazi Germany and Hitler have to be defeated. And so that's the kind of military piece. But then they come home and immediately start fighting for civil rights, or continue fighting for civil rights, because they never stop. And they become the lifeblood of the NAACP and the Urban League and other civil rights organizations, because they see those two parts of the battle as intertwined. That it wasn't just enough to defeat the Nazis militarily if you're still going to have white supremacy here in the United States. And so I think for those black veterans who came home and fought with Medgar Evers and others, they were fighting to make America a country that actually was worth fighting for.
Yeah. When we come forward, looking at my clock here, after news, traffic, and sports, I want to come to this other issue that you raised a moment ago, and that is that in every war this country's had, African Americans have fought. And after every one of these wars, they come home and racism gets worse. It doesn't get better. There's no payoff for them putting themselves on their lives on the line to fight and defend this country. Many, of course, lose their lives on battlegrounds around the world, African Americans, that is, defending this country. But every time they come home, it never gets better. How many times did or do black folk have to go through that process to learn that just because we defend them, they don't stand for and by us? That question and more to Matthew Delmont, author of the book Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad in advance of Veterans Day this Friday. You are listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
We may be LA's newest talk station, but when you're punching above your weight, it's not about whether you can throw a punch. Can you take a punch? We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. And we don't black down.
I'm Mike Moore, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Rain and storm surge are some of the main concerns as Tropical Storm Nicole approaches Florida. The National Hurricane Center now says parts of Florida could see 3 to 5 inches of rain. Meantime, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is possible for places including North Palm, up to 3 feet of storm surge. We have learned that Houston Astros manager, African-American Dusty Baker, says he plans to stay with the World Series champions next season. Baker made the announcement on Tuesday, though details of the new contract haven't been worked out. And we say happy birthday to African-American R&B singer Cisco, who turns 44 today, best known for his hit singles, Incomplete and Thong Song. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Seen a couple of trouble spots for the 405, north side of the 405 at National as you traveled into Culver City. Got a crash here trying to clear as far back as Manchester, La Cienega, got covered away from LAX, the busy drive, and then adding to the tough commute, 405 north at Santa Monica. Word of a wreck in traffic lanes here. South side of the 405, top of the hill, Mulholland Screwball, Sepulveda Pass is where we have a stalled vehicle. Cleared from lanes for that busy drive as far back as Nordoff. Sun Valley, the 5 south at Sheldon, looks like the right lane with some flooding there.
Do you need new blinds or shades? Blindster.com offers custom-made blinds, shades, and shutters shipped directly to you at prices less than big box retailers. Blindster blinds are easy to install and guaranteed to fit. Don't overpay for new blinds. Shop today and save big. Blindster.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richards.
To re-sign Odell Beckham Jr., he won't have any trouble moving on to another team. Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones said he's very interested in signing one of the NFL's premier wide receivers. The New York Giants have also inquired about Beckham. Because Beckham is a free agent, teams can talk to him. Beckham is still in L.A. rehabbing from a torn ACL that he suffered in the Super Bowl. A schedule change for the Chargers. The NFL moved their game against the Chiefs on November 20th from Sunday afternoon to the league's Sunday night showcase on NBC. The Lakers and Clippers face each other tonight at Crypto.com Arena. The Clippers are the home team. The Lakers are trying to snap a 3-game losing streak. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by MVP Accident Attorneys. When it comes to your settlement, we're slam dunk. Call 833-MVP-WINS or check their website at themvp.com for a free case review.
When you're the victim of a car accident, hiring the right law firm can be the difference between a rewarding settlement and striking out. Call the pros at MVP Accident Attorneys at 833-MVP-WINS for your free consultation.
Call me your MVP.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Maisha Cairo here with Dom Kennedy at JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black generational wealth building in Black communities. He's an independent rapper and the owner of OPM record label. Dom Kennedy, why do you find it important to be here today at this event with Chase?
For me, we've been having a lot of conversations with them, and been giving me a lot of good facts and a lot of good feedback that I felt like needed to be shared. And if people heard it, they would take to the information and it would help them on their quest to be homeowners and just better off financially across the board. They like my perspective, and being an artist and somebody that people knew that was born and raised in LA, people older and like bank managers could kind of be a little intimidating, I guess, to everyday people, especially that has never purchased a home. So just the angle of me being able to communicate it and make the story real, I guess for the younger people was a great opportunity, and I didn't want to pass on.
That's awesome. So answer me this. Why is it important for companies like Chase to promote generational wealth in Black and brown communities?
Keep it real. They make a lot of money off the Black and brown communities. I look at it like it's a great responsibility for them to take on, to want to share some knowledge and some facts and try to put more people in homes, and give them a shot at and a chance at generational wealth. I think it's beneficial to both parties,
I'm Aisha Cairo, and that was Dom Kennedy. Stay tuned for more tips from Chase's advocate.
Hi, I'm Sedarius Blaine, actor from the Jumanji movies, The Big Leap on Fox, Charmed, and more. I started an all-inclusive luxury travel club called Top Shelf Getaways that's now visited 14 countries in the last 2 years and counting. Now, we're rolling out our local staycations so you can experience the excitement and spirit of adventure that we're known for right here in Southern California. Starting November 11th, come join us for a celebration of excellence as we honor some of Hollywood's biggest legends at the W Hotel in Hollywood, California. Our staycation will feature live performers, singers, magicians, mixologists, and private chefs, as well as a private screening of Black Panther Wakanda Forever at the world-famous TCL Chinese Theater and an after-party. Transportation from the hotel and overnight stay at the W are included. November 12th will be our bottomless brunch pool party sponsored by El Cristiano Tequila. All of this for only $500 per person, $800 per couple, or select the locals rate to indulge in Friday night only. Follow us on Instagram or visit TopShelfGetaways.com to secure your tickets today. We can't wait to see you. And don't forget to wear your all-black cocktail attire.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
I'm Tavis Smiley. At the top of the next hour, a conversation with Theo. Well, I shouldn't call him Theo. Malcolm Jamal Warner. Theo on the Huxtables, on the Cosby Show, is joining us in our third hour today for a conversation about his acting, about his writing, about his music, and so much more. Malcolm Jamal Warner, busy than ever these days, and looking forward to our conversation with Malcolm Jamal Warner next hour. In this hour, we continue our conversation with civil rights expert and Dartmouth history professor Matthew Delmont. His book is called Half American: The Epic Story of African Americans Fighting World War II at Home and Abroad. The book is out now, and in advance of Veterans Day this Friday, having a conversation about all things black folk and military. So, military service, I should say. So, Professor Delmont, I was saying before news, traffic, and sports that, and you laid this out, of course, in conversation and more expressly in your book, the experience that black men and women had when they came home from World War II. But that sort of maltreatment when they got home is no different than what black folk have experienced after serving in every other war that this country has engaged. And I guess the question is, how many times do we have to go through this to know that our putting ourselves on the line, again, back to that question, is America worth defending? Is America worth fighting for? Well, the answer is clearly no. If we come back home and still continue to be maltreated, at least it's no to my mind, if we come back home and continue to be maltreated, but this cycle is nothing new for black people.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most disheartening parts about studying this history and writing about this history, is that the kind of treatment black veterans received when they came back from World War II was horrific. There were open attacks and murders of black veterans as soon as they arrived back in the United States. Some while still wearing their military uniforms. In terms of policies, black veterans weren't able to benefit from the GI Bill in the same way that white veterans were. And the stories that black veterans told is that they didn't have parades when they got back. Or they were shuffled off to sort of these out of the way locations where when they came back in the same way that white veterans did. And they came back to a country that was even more eager to put them back in their so-called place as second-class citizens. the bounds of Jim Crow got tightened even more in those years after the war. And what's sad about that is that it was so similar to the kind of treatment Black veterans got after World War I, that there was open racial attacks, open racist violence against Black veterans in their communities in the years after World War I. And so I think you're right. From where we sit today, it's clear that idea that so many activists have throughout the 20th century that military service was going to be the linchpin of claims for Black citizenship, it doesn't hold water. It didn't come to pass after World War I, didn't come to pass after World War II, not after Korea, not after Vietnam. And I think that the only thing that complicates that is that when the military finally desegregates in 1948, the military, despite the fact that there's still obviously racism and discrimination within the military takes on more of a leadership role among major institutions than a lot of other parts of American society. And so I think the reason you still see so many Black Americans serving in the military, particularly after Vietnam, it becomes an all-volunteer force, is that when folks look at their potential choices, the kind of racism in the military isn't so dissimilar to what you would encounter in corporate America or in academia or in other blue-collar jobs. And so the military doesn't necessarily stand out as being any worse than any other industry. And in some cases, it might be better than the treatment you might get in other jobs.
Yeah. To put a finer point on this, and this is one of the things that has always disturbed me whenever I have these conversations or think about the service of Black people in these wars, particularly with World War II. And you know this because you're the scholar and you write about it, but it's, again, worth putting a finer point on. That before they get home from victory in World War II, Tuskegee Airmen, all the stuff we've been discussing, before they get home to be maltreated, they're actually maltreated before they even leave Europe. Because as you well know, these Black servicemen and women, mostly men, had to sit in the back of the train behind Nazi war criminals. I mean, they put themselves on the line to fight and defend this country. And even before getting home, they're forced to sit at the back of the train behind war criminals. How do you process that?
It's horrific. It's one of the most common stories that Black veterans would tell is that at the end of the war, whether they were in occupied Germany or even back in the United States where some of the Nazi POWs were, they saw their white countrymen, other white Americans who were in the service, treating these Nazi POWs, Black servicemen and women, that these Nazi POWs were allowed to eat in parts of the dining facilities that were off limits to Black Americans. They could sit in parts of the movie theater. They could ride in the whites-only parts of trains that Black Americans were prevented from riding in. And that really put into clear perspective the fact that white Americans weren't fighting the same kind of war that Black Americans were fighting during World War II. I think part of the reality of the Double Victory campaign is Black Americans were fighting to change the country, whereas a lot of white Americans were fighting to keep things as they were before the start of the war. Mm-hmm. They wanted to defeat the Nazis militarily, but they wanted to maintain the racial status quo. And for Black troops and veterans to see this, to see their fellow white American soldiers being chummy with Nazi POWs who only months before had been trying to kill Americans, it made it clear that there was not a shared commitment to actual freedom and democracy in the United States. That these white soldiers were going to go back, and many did join organizations that were openly trying to prevent Black rights or even threaten or kill Black service members once they got home.
Yeah. This period of time, as you well know, has been referred to. Let me rephrase that. Those who fought in this war, this particular war, during this period of American history, have been referred to many times as the greatest generation. When we hear that phrase, the greatest generation, we're talking primarily about the white brothers. But would you say that this is the greatest generation of African Americans?
I think it's a remarkable generation of Black Americans, and because what they fought for and what they endured is just remarkable. I think you can look through any time period in African American history and the stories we can tell about great grandparents and grandparents. People who aren't famous, people who just they fought these battles in local communities. They're all inspiring, and so I wouldn't want to rank any particular generation above any others. But I think relative to their white peers, I think relative to the people who are usually talked about when we talk about the greatest generation, Black veterans did so much more. Because they fought the military battles, but they also fought to make America a country that was actually going to live up to its supposed founding ideals. And I think if we're going to talk about the greatest generation and referring to white Americans, you have they came home in 1945, and we still had Jim Crow segregation officially through the mid-1960s, until the Civil Rights Act is passed, until the Voting Rights Act is passed in the middle of the 1960s. And we know there's still plenty of racism that endures generations after that. And so we can't really, with a straight face, say that that generation of white Americans was the greatest generation if they weren't willing to come home and end racial hierarchies and racial apartheid in the United States.
That's a powerful, powerful point. I didn't know what your answer was going to be to that question, but that last answer is what I was looking for. It seems to me that you can't call them the greatest generation, given how they maltreated and misbehaved vis-a-vis black folk and black humanity and black dignity when they got home. But we use these phrases all the time. I just said yesterday on this program that slogans are not solutions. We're a nation that just loves slogans. We love slogans, and calling that generation the greatest generation, even pushing back on that may get me in some trouble on this program. But at the end of the day, I'm with you. It's hard to call them the greatest generation if you can't put all of that in context. No matter how successful they were defeating Hitler in World War II. That said, you mentioned Bayard Rustin. We talked about Bayard Rustin earlier in this conversation, and you unpacked a lot for us to consider about who Bayard Rustin really was, and I'm just so glad we had that conversation. There's some other great characters in this book, and I want to ask you just right quick. I'm going to throw a couple of names at you and have you share with the audience some stories about why they are in this book and the role they played during this time period, namely Thurgood Marshall and Ella Baker. So we talked about Bayard Rustin. Say a quick word about Thurgood Marshall during this period, a name that we all know, and about Ella Baker, a name we all know during this period.
So during this period, Thurgood Marshall is the head of the legal division of the NAACP. And so he's traveling all across the country investigating acts of violence against black troops on these army bases, particularly in the U.S. South. And one thing a lot of people don't realize is when black troops get sent to these bases in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, they're treated horrifically, both on base and in the surrounding towns. It gets so bad that they are writing letters to the NAACP and to black newspapers saying that we would be safer if we deployed to war in the European theater and the Pacific theater than we would be staying in these southern towns. And so Marshall's job is to gather this evidence, to investigate these claims, and then to make sure that military officials and politicians are held to account. And so he is this almost larger-than-life figure that emerges during the war, and it's really almost impossible to understand the rest of his civil rights career if you don't understand the really important work he's doing. Ella Baker, what's so important about her, I think everyone knows her grassroots organizing and how it lays the foundation for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 1960s and even provides a model that Black Lives Matter used in these past years. During the war, she's the one who helps the NAACP expand dramatically because she's the head of branches, and so she's also traveling all across the country. At the start of the war in 1940, the NAACP only has 350 branches and about 50,000 members. At the end of the war, they have 1,000 branches and 450,000 members. And so she does just tremendous work organizing local people. And her big innovation is that she realizes that the NAACP can't just organize among black professionals. It can't just be doctors and lawyers, but it has to be everyday black folk, sharecroppers, and just everyday people who she's going to meet in churches and in barbershops and beauty parlors. And she creates the infrastructure that really births the civil rights movement after the war, doing these leadership training workshops where she reaches folks like Rosa Parks and others, and provides the infrastructure support that really blossoms into the civil rights, a large civil rights movement in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah. The bravery and patriotism in the face of unfathomable racism is both, I think, inspiring and galvanizing. And the history that Matthew Delmont lays out in this text is worthy of reading. It's called Half American Fighting World War II at Home and Abroad, having this conversation in advance of Veterans Day this Friday. More with Professor Delmont when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
It's the holiday season. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News. Some things to look forward to this holiday season. Whitney fans, Whitney Houston's estate to release fragrance in her honor, reportedly marking one of the first official endorsement deals for the late singer. Available through the Home Shopping Network, Scent Beauty, and even Walmart by mid-November. And fans are also thrilled to see the Best Man franchise back on screen, this time as a limited series debuting in December on Peacock. I just love the holidays. What are you most excited about this season? Tweet us to let us know at KBLA 1580, #KBlackMinuteHoliday.
probably good to fly. I probably don't have COVID.
Take the probably out of your plans. Test for COVID-19 if you've been exposed, when you're feeling sick, and before and after traveling and gathering. Learn more at covid19.ca.gov. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
When you're the victim of a car accident, hiring the right law firm can be the difference between a rewarding settlement and striking out. Call the pros at MVP Accident Attorneys at 833-MVP-WINS for your free consultation.
Call me your MVP.
Roll out. The all-new Gardena Nissan is proud to be a partner of KBLA, and right now during their fall sales event, Zero Down delivers any new or pre-owned car at Gardena Nissan. They're located conveniently on Redondo Beach Boulevard at Western, and they specialize in helping folks out who have no credit, bad credit, bankruptcies, or repos. The folks at Gardena Nissan will take fantastic care of you and help you get into the car you need and deserve at a spectacular price. Visit them today or shop online at GardinaNissan.com. The all-new Gardena Nissan is proud to be a partner of KBLA, and right now during their fall sales event, Zero Down at Gardena Nissan. For the best deals, log on to GardinaNissan.com. Zero down on approved credit. GardinaNissan.com.
Roll out.
Broadcasting live from Leimert Park, USA. Welcome back to your home for unapologetically progressive radio. KBLA Talk 1580.
I mentioned a moment ago, Professor Belmont, how the bravery and patriotism of these black men and women is both inspiring and galvanizing. You detail their patriotism in this text. And during that break, I thought about the famous quote from Frederick Douglass, who said, "I make no pretension to patriotism. So long as my voice can be heard on this or the other side of the Atlantic, I will hold up America to the lightning scorn of moral indignation. In doing this, I shall feel myself discharging the duty of a true patriot, for he is a lover of his country, who rebukes and does not excuse its sins. It is righteousness that exalteth a nation, while sin is a reproach to any people." The powerful words of Frederick Douglass talking about his definition, essentially, of patriotism. How did these persons serving in World War II define that word, patriotism?
I think that's a great quote. And for the black Americans who served in World War II, held very, very similar opinions. I think that the through line for that generation of black troops and black veterans was that patriotism and dissent were intertwined. Mm-hmm. That in many cases, they were proud to fight for their country. And even those who might have been ambivalent about the idea of fighting for America, they still accepted their draft status and served proudly and were willing to risk their lives in the military effort. But the dissent piece was always linked to the patriotism piece, because any black American you asked in the 1940s recognized that America was not okay. They recognized that black people were not being treated equally and nowhere near it. And they wanted profound changes to come to the country. And so I think that's the piece that is too easy to get World War II in a more kind of simplistic way, talk about the quote-unquote good war, or the quote-unquote greatest generation, is that if you focus on the reality of what black Americans did during the war and what they did after the war, you have to talk about patriotism and dissent together, that it's not enough to just fight for America, but part of what it means to actually fight for your country is to fight to make it a place that is actually going to be a true democracy, where black people could vote and could be free from racial violence by white mobs and by police. They could have equal access to education and to jobs and to housing. That those were the kind of things that black veterans were fighting for. And I think if there's anything that people take away from the book, it's reclaiming that reality, that patriotism and dissent have always been linked in black history, and nowhere more so than for that generation of black veterans.
Yeah. I'll put you on the spot here. As a matter of fact, I'll ask a question now, let you think about it, so I won't put you on the spot. When we come forward, we'll give you a chance to get to offer your response. You mentioned Saving Private Ryan earlier as the kind of movie that does not tell the true story of the contributions of African Americans in particular. But I'm wondering, given that you are an author, and we'll read your book, the audience will read the text, but I'm wondering if there is a film or a documentary or something visual that you've seen in your work and witness in your research that does in fact give us a truer, a more accurate picture of the role that black men and women played in World War II. We'll get his question to that, since I'm sitting in LA where Hollywood is, anything he would recommend that we look at, anything he has seen that he thinks does do a decent job of explaining the role that black folk played during this critical period of American history. That question and perhaps one more in our remaining moments with Matthew Delmont when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We don't try to be all things to all people. We just remain true to who we are. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Come on, we're going to be late to the cookout.
I was just packing up my famous mac and cheese.
I hope you packed the Pepto, too.
Huh?
Pepto-Bismol provides fast relief from heartburn and indigestion. You know, that uncomfortable feeling after you eat too much, and after the deviled eggs, baked beans, and barbecue ribs. You're going to need it.
Barbecue ribs? I should probably pack an extra shirt, too.
Good call.
When you have nausea, heartburn, indigestion, diarrhea.
Pepto-Bismol. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Four racial arsonists set LA City Hall on fire. And everybody is running out of the building straight to KBLA Talk 1580.
I am pleased to welcome LA City Councilman Mike Bonin to this program. Councilman, how are you, sir?
Hello. Thank you, Tavis.
Councilmember Kern Price, good to have you on, sir. How are you today?
I'm well, Tavis. Thank you. Good to be with you.
LA City Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez on this program. How are you today, ma'am?
Good morning, Tavis.
Councilman O'Farrell, good to have you on, sir. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Tavis. So glad to join you this morning.
Councilman Koretz, welcome to this program, sir. How are you?
I'm honored to be on your show. I'm still in shock from the events of the last few days.
Marquise Harris Dawson, good morning.
Good morning, Dominique, and good morning to the KBLA family.
Councilmember Heather Hutt, good morning.
Good morning, Dominique.
I am pleased to welcome the new president of the LA City Council, Paul Kikoy. Mr. President, how are you, sir?
Good morning, Tavis. I'm well. Thank you very much.
Holding all politicians accountable to you. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Professor Delmont, your book is a welcome addition to U.S. history. It's being regarded and celebrated as the definitive history of World War II from the African American perspective. So congratulations on that. So I'm glad the text is here. I'm wondering whether or not Hollywood has done anything that you find worthy of viewing vis-a-vis this particular story that you're telling so brilliantly in the text.
Yeah, thanks for asking. There's three things I would recommend. There's a documentary that's almost 20 years old now called The Invisible Soldiers, Unheard Voices. That is just a tremendous documentary because it looks at a number of the individual experiences of black troops and veterans during the war. And so I would recommend that, Invisible Soldiers. People could still find that online. A lot of people probably saw the Spike Lee film, Miracle at St. Anna, based on the novel by James McBride. I think among kind of big budget Hollywood films, I think that has been the best one to talk about black Americans during World War II, and so I would recommend that one. And then more recently, if folks have Netflix, Medal of Honor, and one of those episodes is about a man named Edward Carter, who's probably the most fascinating black American who served during the war. He was raised abroad and was fluent in Hindi, Mandarin, and German, but despite all that, the Army assigned him to be a cook in a quartermaster truck company. Later in the war, he volunteers for combat duty. He ends up playing a really important role in a battle against Nazi troops. He kills 6 of them, captures the remaining 2, and he's awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously in 1997. And so folks go on Netflix and check out that episode on Edward Carter in the Medal of Honor series. I think among recent things, that's the best I've seen.
No, thank you for sharing that. Here's my exit question, I think, in the 2 minutes I have left here. This book is obviously about the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. It's called, once again, Half American. What would you suggest to those persons in this contemporary moment who are considering joining the military but are wrestling with that same question that these persons wrestled with many years ago, that question of whether or not America is worth defending?
I think do your homework and understand the history and know what your choices are. I think for a large number of black men and women who join the military and other men and women from communities of color who join the military, they opt for military service without understanding the obligation and what it means without understanding their other options. I think there have been generations now of black people who have found successful long-term careers in the military. And so I think talking to people who are currently in service and who are veterans about what the reality of military service is, that it's not what it appears to be in TV series and in films, but it's a job. It's a job that can sometimes have deadly consequences if you get sent to war. And I think being clear-eyed about what it means, what the military has meant in the United States, that it hasn't always proven good on the promise of the kind of equality that Black Americans have been demanding for so long.
We celebrate the service of those who have put themselves on the line for the rest of us in this country this Friday, of course, Veterans Day. So again, a propitious time, I think, to have had this conversation with Dartmouth professor Matthew Delmont. The text is called Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. Professor Delmont, congrats on the text, man. Thank you for the conversation. Good to have you on this program.
Thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir. After news, traffic, and sports, in our final hour today, a conversation with Malcolm Jamal Warner on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.